Scientists have identified two more genes which are linked to dyslexia, a reading disability that affects millions of people. Up to 20% of people with dyslexia studied have one of the genes called DCDC2. Dr. Jeffrey Gruen from the Yale Health Research Centre, who's announced the discovery, says the findings show that for the most part dyslexia is genetic.
These children and these adults that are struggling are intelligent, they're bright, and they're talented. And what we're doing is we're setting up roadblocks for them to achieve the same sort of academic success that other kids can have. And there's no reason why it is that they shouldn't share in that academic success, that they shouldn't live their passions, say if they want to be attorneys or physicians or journalists, and wherever their passions take them, their horizon should be just as limited as any child in school, as long as we tailor how we teach them to read differently, because it can't be sort of a one-size-fits-all situation. They learn to read differently. Their intelligence is intact. Their talent is apparent, but they learn to read differently. And since we frequently equate intelligence with your ability to read, then they're put at a disadvantage. But if we identify them early, and that's message number 3, with the identification of these genes, these gene markers, and these differences, if we identify them early and get them into early intervention programs that we know work and work well when they're implemented early, like in the primary grades, then what we can do is help them get through the self-esteem issues, help them get on the road to reading, and there's no reason in the world to expect that their academic success won't equal their fluent reading partners.
So it's easy to identify the gene. That's a simple test that can be done. Children get taken along to wherever and get tested for it.
Well, we all have these genes. Certainly, all of us do. But what some of us have are variations of these genes. And these variations are, as you say, indeed easy to identify. What we don't know right now is the positive predictive value.
What does that mean?
For example, I'll show you. So, for example, in the gene that we've been working on called double cortin 2, or DCDC2, we've identified a large deletion, and we know the deletion is prevalent amongst adults and children with dyslexia. But I don't know yet, and the studies are just starting to answer this question. If I were to identify such a deletion, say, in your child or my child, what's the likelihood that this child will develop dyslexia? Is it 90% or is it 40%? And right now we don't know the answer to that because the studies we've done were not specifically designed to answer those questions. The studies we've done to date were specifically designed to identify variations of these genes associated with dyslexia, but not the positive predictive value. How well does a test predict whether dyslexia will arise in this particular child? But those studies are being done now. More importantly, before any type of screening can be undertaken, particularly in the States, and I don't know New Zealand yet, but particularly in the States, we need the infrastructure to intervene. How frustrating would it be if a parent were told that their child would have a 20%, a 50%, an 80% likelihood of developing dyslexia, but we have no early intervention for your child? I think that would be heartbreaking and just plain wrong. So I think what we need as a society, as a people, is we need the will to be able to set up these early intervention programs that would coincide with early screening, which technically is not difficult to do at all. And then once we have the early intervention sort of programs set up, then we can really have a serious discussion about how, when, and whom to screen.
What happens when a child looks at the written word and is dyslexic? What do they see?
They see the written word exactly as you do. 30 years ago, 35 years ago, people used to think that the way dyslexics perceived the world or saw written letters or saw written words was different than the fluent reader. In fact, that's not the case at all. Their problem comes in when it comes time to decode a word into its separate phonemes or syllables, and then to associate those syllables and words into a picture, a thought, a concept, an emotion that we're able to do. So dyslexics learn to read differently than fluent readers. And frequently they find themselves memorizing words, so for sight reading, whereas most of us, especially English-speaking world, learn to read phonetically. That's where they fall down. They have difficulty really interpreting phonetics. There are PhDs that are severely dyslexic. There are phenomenal successes in politics, phenomenal successes in the arts, and in the business world, and even now in law. And the ways they get around it is they begin to build up a large vocabulary of words that they've memorized and can sight read. But it takes time for them to do that. And so in the elementary years, the middle school years, and the high school years, they have a real difficult time. Once these kids really start getting into college, if you can preserve them, if their self-esteem remains intact, they do marvelously well because they have a big enough lexicon to really hit most words pretty well. But even PhDs that I've met, when they're encountered a new word that is phonetically non-intuitive to read, like the letter combination of GM or TH or these sorts of things, PH, they can stumble and really stumble on those type of words. So it's mostly sight-written. They learn to read differently, and we need to learn to accommodate that.
So it's kind of hopeless putting children into remedial reading classes and all that sort of thing if you're not actually teaching them what? To simply memorize words.
Well, I wouldn't use the word hopeless. What I would say is what we've learned is they need a new type or a different type of learning process. And there are now several different interventions that folks have shown work really, really well. They work best, however, when they're done early. That is, when they're started in the primary years, second, third, fourth grade, and not waiting until those children are in the high school years or in the teen years. Our hope is that sometime in the future, and I'm not talking the long-term future, I'm talking the short-term future, is that we'll be able to tailor specific interventions with particular genetic makeups. For example, we might identify that a particular allele of, say, DCDC2, the gene we're interested in, does best with intervention program X or intervention program Y. And at least in the States, we're spending tons of money on these children, but we're spending it later on in remedial classes. And there, I agree with you. Now, hopeless, no. Difficult, absolutely. And so as soon as we can learn to deal with this and intervene early, I think we can really make a difference in these children's lives.
And that's Dr. Jeffrey Gruen from the Yale Health Research Centre.